I almost think of it like a video game. You've got like 10 boats, 3 get through type of thing. But
they're all going through.
But that's my point. Does this make any sense to you, Patrick?
No.
Let's be honest, Patrick. This is f***ing pathetic.
It pisses me off. It brings me to the verge of tears.
How much are we spending on this?
Yeah, well, an astronomical amount of money, but between something like 8 billion quid a year on the migrant hotels or 6 billion quid a year, the British public are being asked to put up with a hell of a lot here. We are being asked to take on a huge personal safety risk.
His idea was that the way you deal with this problem, you smash the gangs. How are we doing on smashing the gangs?
Well, we're not smashing any gangs, so that's good.
What do you think it actually says about us as a country?
Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I've been meaning to have you on for a while, but you've been doing some really, really good investigative journalism, which has been great to see on an issue that a lot of people talk about, but you've actually gone and done some proper looking into things, showing things about illegal immigration and the nature of that problem. Talk to us about what you found.
Yeah, gosh, well, I mean, where to start, really? First thing I will say is how easy it was. I mean, genuinely, just go there and you'll see the sheer scale of the problem. So the scale of it is the first thing. The lack of action by the French is another, and we'll get into this no doubt. But for example, where the biggest camp near Calais is, there's a huge camp, and then there's a little bit of a field, and then there's a beach. And for the £500 million we've sent the French, they've not even put a fence up. So that's a slight issue. So there's that. There's also the type of person who's coming across. We now, I think, rightly, openly laugh at people who say, well, it's all poor women and children. Well, there are some women and children, and clearly, I don't like seeing them getting into boats and taking a dangerous journey across the busiest shipping lane in the world. Nobody does. But the absolute stone cold reality of the situation is that the overwhelming majority of these people are young men, and it's not just about where they're coming from, it's the fact that they have all, by definition, travelled through numerous different other countries and for whatever reason been unable to make a life for themselves there. Some of them undoubtedly through criminality, some of them potentially through choice, most of them through a lack of opportunity in any of those countries. And what that means, if you take it to its natural conclusion, is the calibre of person that we are now getting crossing the English Channel is very, very low. Is very, very low. Because a lot of people, if you are a genuine doctor or engineer, there is a very good chance that you would have been able to have found a life for yourself in one of these other countries. And I don't particularly necessarily like using this term of language, but yeah, we are, in a sense, I think, in many cases, getting the dregs of the migrant crisis problem.
Well, that would make sense in many ways because, as you say, people who are qualified to do a skilled job would find themselves a job somewhere else. And also, a lot of those people might be entitled to come here legally because we do need the doctors and the nurses and the whatever who can come in if they make an application. So, but it sort of makes a lot of sense that people who are coming illegally are doing so because actually we don't want people like that to come.
Yeah, 100%. That's the reality of it. A lot of them, when you actually go and talk to them in person, so whether it's at them just wandering around the streets, or it's in the camps, or it's in one of the big warehouses that I went to where people are looking more to try to get into the lorry park side of it, which I don't think gets enough attention, actually, the illegal lorry crossings. When you actually talk to them in unguarded moments, they're not particularly fussed about the idea that they're fleeing war and persecution, or that they are actually persecuted Christians in a country, or that they're gay, or all of this stuff. They are quite open about the fact that they want to come to Britain for a house and for money and because we've got a generous benefit system, and that they think that there is very little chance of them being deported in Britain. So they actually say this stuff to you, and there's been a couple of quite massive clips that I did off that. It was a Sudanese man who, was just saying, well, give me a house and give me this and give me that. And that is the general kind of attitude. It's when they get here and maybe get into contact with certain lawyers or certain charity groups that you start to get these yarns about the level of persecution they might face back home, the trauma that they might have felt en route, and various different incredibly spurious reasons in some cases as to why they could never be returned home. They're not saying that stuff in these camps and when they're walking down the street. They weren't saying that to me, and they would have had the perfect opportunity to do so. I mean, one chap was an Eritrean man who says he's left his wife in Eritrea. So I said, well, why, if it was a war zone? He did make some vague reference about it being a war zone, couldn't explain why he'd left his wife there. And then I said, how are you continually trying to afford the boats? But his mum and dad, who are in Eritrea, are sending him the money for it. So there's a few things there that don't quite add up really about them being, desperately poverty-stricken, in constant plight in their home country. I mean, if it's safe enough to leave your parents and your wife over there, and your parents are funding your journey continuously, it doesn't quite add up to me, this idea that they're all that poor and desperate.
Patrick, I think it's worth you outlining how the system actually works, because a lot of these guys, they don't just come from one particular country. It's 6 or 7. They go through Austria. One person in particular was talking about going through Austria, Hungary, all of these types of countries. So how does the system actually work? And also explain about the criminality involved in it, because I think that's a key part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so it depends where on the earth you start out, clearly, but it's very easy to travel through parts of Africa and the Middle East initially. So they'll find people that can get them through there. I think everyone accepts that. But then when you get into Europe, there's various different routes. So you can either get a boat from parts of Africa to islands like Lampedusa, for example, where we've seen huge numbers of almost entirely African migrants coming there. Then you're in the European Union. What they used to do as well was there was a big route that took you through Morocco, and there's 2 Spanish enclaves in Morocco. One of them is called Ceuta. I can't quite remember the name of the other one now. I think it begins with an M. But once you can get into those, you're then in the EU again there. So they never had to cross the Strait of Gibraltar. From there, they would be divvied up. Some of the other routes, of course, are, like you've mentioned there, to kind of just go continuously by land through various different countries. So some of the Balkan states, and then you're in.
Patrick, just pause right there. Sorry to interrupt. Okay, I've made it to Lampedusa, but why does that mean I now get to go to Austria?
Well, because that's basically what the European Union rules are, really. So they don't seem to be processing you there and then any risk of deportation. So then as part of some kind of EU-wide scheme, etc., they will then divvy you out to various...
So once you've made landfall in the EU, that's you sorted?
Pretty much, yeah. Once you have kissed European soil, there is very, very little chance of you being removed to your home country. And you also have to look at the psychology of those frontier European countries. So whether that's Greece, in the case of Lampedusa, Italy, or some of the Balkan states, if they know that it's going to be very difficult to get you out of there, or you're just going to keep coming back, then in their minds, they'll just move you on through, won't they? So it's not in their interest or their incentive to try to keep you or to house you there. As far as they're concerned, they're very, very happy to see you move on through. But in terms of the ease with which you can get in touch with human traffickers and people smugglers, that's almost all done through social media. So TikTok, really, predominantly. And it's incredibly easy. So you will be able to, in seconds, find on TikTok, depending on where you're located around Europe, in the case of the ones I've been looking into, they're in France, you'll be able to find their accounts on TikTok, advertising crossings, advertising all sorts of stuff. You will then start contacting them just through direct messenger on TikTok. You'll then progress very quickly to WhatsApp. And then on WhatsApp, they'll give you pin locations of where to go and a price, really, of how much it's going to cost for you to then meet up with that person. And then in the case of France, obviously get on a boat. If you're further down the line, get on a lorry. And then they will facilitate that for you. And it's entirely done on social media. And the social media companies have a huge amount to answer for here, because it is unbelievably easy to do that. The other, I think, aspect to your question that you said was it about the violence or things like that? You said
the criminality involved.
Well, the criminality involved is something that I find absolutely staggering. So, very recently, we found a human trafficker who, on their stories on both TikTok and on WhatsApp, their stories, they were posting pictures of what appeared to be an AR-15 rifle, semi-automatic rifle, the rifle that's probably shot to prominence a little bit more because of things like school shootings in America. I think the Las Vegas shooting as well. That level of weaponry. And that person who the day before had been giving us locations to go here, meet me here, left us voice notes, we had his voice, we can get you across the channel, is posting pictures of themselves with assault weapons. So they're armed, they're tooled up. The other aspects of criminality about it, I would say, that I'm very concerned of, and I think that more people should be concerned about, is the potential extreme Islamist threat to it. So, again, there's another clip that I'm probably going to end up playing on my show tonight. I don't know when this show airs. It probably would have gone out by then. But of a human trafficker who was posting the usual videos of people in boats, showing their clientele how easy it is and how readily they can get them across the channel. And then in amongst that, emerges the black flag of ISIS, with ISIS execution videos, people being shot in the back of the head, battlefield footage from what appears to be parts of the world like Syria, for example, when ISIS were in their pomp, with music playing in the background. And then you're back again to the videos of people crossing the English Channel. So this is the kind of person who in many cases is running this operation. There's numerous different nationalities involved. There's a lot of Kurds. There are a lot of people who are Iraqis and Iranians, but there's also a lot of Albanians, and they are still at it. Although with the Albanians, there's a slightly more grey area about where they stand on that spectrum, because there is a sizable Muslim population in Albania, and from what I can tell from their videos, they do appear to be both armed and, in the case of the ISIS stuff, they were on their things, they've got Albanian flags as well. So I would suggest that they are also quite militant when it comes to the old Islam stuff.
You know, it's also really interesting as well, because in part of the documentary, and I advise everyone to go and watch it, it's really illuminating and obviously horrifying at the same time. But you had a phone call with one of these people traffickers, and you showed how easy it was to get a job illegally in London.
Yep.
In literally a matter of minutes.
100%. So we decided that we were communicating with this human trafficker quite easily, and we thought, well, it might make sense to see if they can not only sort us out with the trip across the channel, but also a bit of work when we get here. Because the story started to break about Deliveroo and Uber Eats and Just Eat, and them operating out of migrant hotels, and your delivery drivers are not who they say they are, all of that. So we thought, okay, well, hang on a minute, how easy is it really? And it turns out within 10 minutes of us messaging our people trafficker friend and asking for a job, he'd given us 2 British phone numbers of people. One of them then preemptively got in touch with us, so he'd obviously passed our number on to him. He said, I've got work for you. He said delivery and things like that. So I mean, that could be anything from, I suppose, drugs or food, couldn't it really? So, but that was straight away, plus voice notes, and one of them was definitely based in the London area as well. So there is a network here. And one thing that I found incredibly frustrating was that it would seem quite obvious to me, and maybe people watching and listening to this as well, that if you've got a human trafficker who can get people across the border very easily, and then he's got contacts over here that sort people up with work, I would suggest that's part of an organised gang, right? that would seem to me to be the obvious thing.
Yeah.
And then when you hand all of that information over, including phone numbers and in some cases locations of where they say they're going to be and when they're going to be there, and voice notes to the authorities, I would have thought that they might act on that, especially given that some of that is categorically and demonstrably taking place in Britain. I have some sympathy for some of the authorities where they say, well, this is in France, isn't it? I do have some sympathy for them for that, to an extent, because what do we do? Send the SAS in? I mean, I might be quite inclined to say at times I think we should, especially if the guy's tooled up and maybe supports ISIS. Like, I'm sure we can do that. But if they might say that's out of their jurisdiction, but I don't see how. Surely the excuse they would need to crack that gang is that it's proof of some operation in Britain.
But it was mind-boggling, because you reported them to the National Crime Agency, and you would think this is something that the National Crime Agency would be all over. But then they just kicked it out. They just weren't interested, were they?
So what they will say, in fact they do say it quite strongly, is that we don't know the half of what they're doing, and they are doing all sorts behind the scenes, and they really are on it. Okay, fine. We have to say, there's only so much I can do with that. I have to kind of assume that they are. I was very disappointed with some of the responses that we got from them on this stuff, and being honest, it didn't seem to me as though they were in a massive rush with it. I also think the thing that they are underestimating is the level of public dissatisfaction with this. So whilst they might be doing all of this great stuff behind the scenes, I would have thought if they were smashing gangs every week, they'd be telling us about it, because they'd want us to know. They'd want me to be reporting that, and I would happily report. I'd love to report that. I'd love to go on air, 9 p.m. or 10 p.m, whatever, and be able to serve up. You know what? Look at this. They've just smashed these gangs today. They've done that. Well, we're not getting any of that. So that implies to me that maybe they're not really doing it. And when you have something very public, like it goes out on my show 3 or 4 nights in succession with all of this information, if I was at National Crime Agency, I would have thought, look, even if it's just to shut me up, we're gonna at least take this guy's TikTok down, or we're going to be seeing we're gonna kick someone's front door in, and we're gonna do that, or we're gonna have a word with the French. We're gonna show something that this guy that just shuts me up, and they didn't really seem to do that. And when it comes to things like the ISIS stuff, or when it comes to things like weaponry, etc., I would suggest that that's a national emergency. The other thing about it is, of course, with everything that's going on in Iran recently, we have had reports through from the intelligence services in Britain that the Iranian regime have been utilising the small boats crisis as a way of planting sleeper cells here in Britain. I'm inclined to, why wouldn't you? I suppose if you were the Iranians, you probably would. So again, that was another thing that I thought would give them a bit of a rocket, because as I was revealing all of this stuff, the Iran situation was flaring up again. So it was on people's minds. We were quite scared. And I couldn't really live with myself if someone had presented me with this information and I was in a position to act, and then one nutter with an AK-47 came across the channel and slaughtered everyone on a border force boat, or managed somehow to bring it into Dover and kicked off there, or did it at a migrant hotel, or whatever. They didn't seem, in my view, to care as much about this issue as I think the vast majority of ordinary people in Britain do.
Why do you think that is?
Maybe it is because they're doing a lot that we don't know about. So maybe they see this stuff every single day and all day and stop most of it. Okay. I don't think it is that, personally. I think they realise that the problem is too big for them to deal with. And I think that they don't really want it getting out there. The other aspect to it, which is really depressing, if this is true, and I hope it isn't true, is that they just don't care massively.
Well, see, the reason I'm asking you this is, like, when you say there's too much of it going on and they can't cope, I almost think of it like a video game. You've got like 10 boats, 3 get through type of thing. But
they're all going through.
but that's my point, right? There's actually no action being taken on it. But as I understand it, once you get on a boat in France, you're basically going to get to England.
You don't even have to get into the channel. You can get into some of the river networks. And because you're technically in the water, if the French decide not to, they don't really have to stop you. So you could get in a boat. The boat that, when I went to Calais, one of the boats that I found in the water, didn't have any people on it, but was ready to go, had the fuel in it and all of that stuff, was 2 miles inland on a river network. So in theory, if like 60 blokes from wherever in the world they've come from boarded that boat, started the motor and started making their way down that canal system, the French might decide just not to stop them because they're in the water. So you don't even have to get in the channel, really.
So when you say the National Crime Agency and other British authorities, they've got too much to deal with, I don't understand what that means. What does that mean? Like, what is the too much that they've got to deal with? Because what I'm seeing, correct me if this is wrong, please, is basically if you get on a boat in France, you're going to make it to England. And when you get here, you're going to get either you're going to just be allowed to walk into the country, or you're going to get taken to a hotel where the taxpayer is going to put you up.
Yeah,
right?
and until you decide to abscond, in which case you just can't do that.
Right. So what is it that they've got too much to deal with?
They might make the case, I imagine they would, that they are not just dealing with the migrant crisis. So the National Crime Agency, I think, deals with things like paedophile rings. It will deal with things like drugs trade and whatever else they've got. So I do have some sympathy for them for that. What I don't have sympathy with is the system. If we know that they are being swamped and that they genuinely can't deal with it, and that they're also helping out with things like cracking paedophile rings and drugs gangs and, I don't know, maybe terrorists in some cases, and everything that we've already got here, and they absolutely can't deal with the fact that if a journalist presents them with a bloke with an assault rifle, ISIS beheading videos, locations where they can't handle that, then they need more manpower, don't they? They absolutely need more manpower. And if we're not getting that for them, then I think that's a real crying shame. This is a ticking time bomb.
Well, right. But the thing is, how much manpower can you give to solve a problem you're not trying to solve? Do you see what I mean? It's like if some boats were being sent back because our authorities were dealing with them, then you need more manpower. When no attempt is being made to stop and turn them around and return them to France, that is not a manpower issue.
There's no accountability to the French. This is the thing. Like I said to you before about that whopping great big migrant camp there with a beach right next to it where boats set off. and not even a fence. We've sent the French £500 million. No, we've put a fence up. The French will do precious little. And part of me can understand it. I mean, if I was French, I'd be quite inclined to get them out of Calais quite quickly. So, yeah, we are being taken for mugs. The other aspect, of course, is that, well, so they're not holding them to account. So there's no one. If I was our dear leader, Sir Keir Starmer, I would be inclined to go and pay a visit to Calais and Dunkirk and those places and have a walk around and raise serious questions about what it is they're doing and the lack of action they're doing. So, for example, we spent a few million quid, we gave to the French to set up state-of-the-art security cameras around the beaches, which even had things like night vision and all of that. And the French just didn't bother to turn them on. So they've had them and they didn't bother to turn them on.
So many jokes
about
the French.
Well, yeah, quite. Yeah. But there's all of this stuff, and we are not holding them to account. And we do have leverage over the French. We do. You know, they want unbridled access to our fishing waters, which we've just given them for the best part of 12 years, as far as I can tell. Well, why did we do that when there's nothing that we're getting back in return? You know, there's also, I think, a level of embarrassment that we could be inflicting on them. There's negative PR that we could be doing in these camps. Why can't we send people, or pay people even, who are maybe failed asylum seekers, or come up with something here to go to these camps to tell people that England is not a land of milk and honey, that they're going to end up living on a roundabout somewhere in Paddington, which has happened. The irony is, right next to the GB News studios, there was an illegal migrant roundabout just within spitting distance of where the studios are for absolutely ages. You could see it there. You know, tell these people some of these horror stories, because they all think in these camps that you get whatever you want in Britain. The depressing thing is, at the moment, they're right about a lot of that. You do get a lot of stuff, but we should be doing that. I think the National Crime Agency probably also feel a bit let down by our political leaders, I think, which is that we're not deporting anyone anyway, are we? We are resolutely unwilling to do anything that might in any way be seen to deviate from this international law situation that we've got. So the National Crime Agency probably feel as though, like, maybe what's the point? What's the point?
And also, perhaps for legal reasons, they can't actually turn the boats around. That seems to be the case as well, right?
Annoyingly, although I would like to see that tested. You see, again, this is a thing. We keep being told that we can't turn the boats around. One of the reasons why, apparently, we can't turn the boats around is because Priti Patel, when she was Home Secretary years ago, wanted to do it. And I think Care for Calais and another group took them to court, and it was decided that that would be illegal. Well, I would like to see that tested, really, because there must be some grounds in which a democratically elected government can stop their country being invaded. There has to be. If we live in a world where boatloads and boatloads and boatloads of illegal men, some of whom, for all we know, might be actual terrorists, and I think there's good reason to suggest that some of them are, in fact, some of them have been, right? So, if we can't turn boats back under those situations and say, I'm sorry, this is an urgent matter of national security, well, then we might as well all pack up and go home, hadn't we? Is there realistically no situation in which we are able to turn those boats back? I refuse to believe that. And yet we don't seem to ever try it.
If you're sick of podcasts that pander to one side or the other, you'll want to hear this. Brad vs. Everyone is one of the few shows that truly doesn't care who it skewers, debunks or mocks. Hosted by Brad Palumbo, an independent journalist who calls it like it is. The podcast covers viral madness from across the political and cultural spectrum, and no one's safe. He goes after Gen Z TikTok scammers and far-right grifters. He'll take apart progressive media darlings and MAGA influencers. All from a place of sharp moderation, not blind loyalty. Think of it like TRIGGERnometry's younger American cousin. Same instinct for cutting through the noise, same appetite for the stories everyone else is too scared or too biased to cover. If you like your commentary honest, sharp, and entirely uncancelable, find Brad vs. Everyone on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Because when you look at that documentary, it was the number's $500 million that we're paying the French, isn't it?
Roughly speaking, yeah.
Yeah, so it's $500 million. What are we getting for our money? Because there was a clip of the gendarmes, which is the French police, and they slashed the boat.
Well, that's quite funny.
They slashed the dinghy.
That's quite funny, because we saw that boat and we were filming around it, and the gendarme initially came up and said, like, what are you doing? Who are you? and then drove away. And we were like, so we've got all this on footage, like, there's this boat here. I mean, bear in mind that boat was ready to go. So presumably somewhere around us would have been, people trafficker, and you started to see people coming on some of the free buses that are around the Calais area, getting off and loitering around. So unequivocally, these people were about to get on that boat and then make a run for it. The gendarme just drove off. So we've got this amazing footage of them just driving across the bridge, like almost like waving it off. And then we went back again about an hour or so later, and then they turned back up. And I think because they realised that the media was there and we'd filmed it, they then winched it out the water and slashed it, and then acted on it. But I didn't get the impression that they would have done that if we weren't there.
Because what comes across in the documentary is that these people feel that they can act with impunity, because the reality is that they can, and they see us as a soft touch, which is utterly infuriating.
It's massively infuriating. We have to also have a thought, at least, about the calibre of human being that is currently leaving Britain. So we're seeing this exodus of people who are worth a few quid and maybe have had some aspiration in their lives, and they want to leave now for a variety of different reasons that I would mostly put at Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves's door, and previous administrations for making part of Britain a bit of a hellhole, I would say. And who are we getting in their place? I mean, I think 1,000 mostly young men came across the last couple of days. Mm-hmm. I doubt that many of them are ever going to pay a serious amount of tax. So we are seeing good, in many cases, wealthy, mobile taxpayers leave the country, and in their place, we are getting a lot of young men from Kuwait, Sudan, and parts of the world that they are probably going to end up living a life on benefits here. And that's just a thing. But you're right about them acting with impunity. I mean, I think it's getting to a point for me now with my reporting on this where I don't want to feel like a broken record, where I'm constantly showing pictures on my show of, we've just got in touch with this other people smuggler, here's him with a gun again, here's him doing this, that and the other. I think the next step for me is probably going to have to be to try to go back over there and try to meet some of these people and try to get their faces on camera and see what we can get. Because I think that will show, again, that the French police are doing absolutely naff all about it. I mean, if we're able to get a phone, get in touch with people, get locations and meet them straight away, why can't the police over there do that and then stop them and make a song and dance over it, make a statement over it?
Absolutely, because there's an entire industry, and you can see it yourself. When you went to these encampments, they're in a warehouse. They look like hundreds of tents. And it was, I mean, you talked about the conditions. The conditions that are abominable.
Yeah, they were. No, they were. I mean, there is an aspect, don't get me wrong, of I would not want to live in a warehouse that stinks of piss, right? I just wouldn't. I don't think any of us would. I mean, I think a lot of them have deliberately put themselves in that situation, so there's that. But those people were all from Sudan, all men. There wasn't a single woman, borderline children, if you want to say. I'm talking probably about 16, 17, so they're still kids, but anyway, that were there. And they were the people who didn't have enough money to pay people smugglers for the boats. So they were trying to get a free lorry ride in. So they'll spend all day and most of the night at the lorry park, which is just next door, just trying their luck, and eventually they'll probably get through. So you've got that going on. I mean, it is what it is. It's a giant warehouse with, I don't know, a few hundred people in it who it's there permanently. It's been there for absolutely ages, and it's right next to a lorry park. And I was there for like 4 or 5 hours. You don't see any police. I mean, there aren't any police there. They're not bothered about it. You know, that's quite galling, really, because the only reason anyone, whether it's in any of those camps, whether it's walking around the streets of Calais or Dunkirk, or whether it's in a warehouse like that, the only reason they're there is to get to Britain. There's no other reason. And you know, that is an invasion. And the French are not doing anything about that, as far as I can tell.
And is the reason what you said earlier, which is effectively, if you are not the final destination country, the incentive structure is for you to just wave people through?
Yeah. And I think they want to embarrass us over Brexit as well. I think there's a lot of that. Because that argument that a lot of Remainers use, which is, well, when we were in the EU, we had the Dublin Agreement, which is that we could have then sent them back to their first port of call. Well, we weren't really doing that anyway. So, like, yeah, we could have done probably, but we weren't. So, you know, that kind of falls through. But I think there's a big bit of sniggering from the European Union nations, which is if we can funnel them through to Britain, you know, rub their noses in the faces of Brexit. And I think they know that we're too kind. I think both the illegal migrants and the continental politicians know that we are a soft touch. We have, in some cases, maybe too many human rights. I think we have a very, very generous benefit system, a very generous housing system, and a load of really useful idiots like the Refugees Welcome Brigade over here, who are just complete signed up nut jobs in many cases, I think, and rampant hypocrites as well, a lot of them. They would never house them in their own homes, of course, or even the ones that they do, like Gary Lineker, will be thoroughly vetted and will be an actual law student or something, and not you know, our mate from Khartoum that we just met in the warehouse there. So yeah, I mean, I think they are just trying to flood us with it out of that, and we're the end of the line geographically, aren't we? I mean, what are we going to start doing? Like, I don't know, funneling them through to Norway or somewhere. I mean, we could try and dump a load of them in Ireland. But then, of course, we haven't got a border there, so like, you know, they'd just wander straight back through, wouldn't they?
So that being the case, talk to me more about the logistics. So I've made landfall in Lampedusa.
Yeah.
I've found someone on TikTok. I've paid them how much would I pay them to get to Calais?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how much you paid to get to Calais, but what I do know is that the going rate currently, as of yesterday, to cross the English Channel could be as low as 1,200 quid.
Mm-hmm. But you say as low, that's not a lot of money. Well, I mean, still a lot of money for people in Britain, but for someone from Eritrea, that could be a year's worth of income.
It could be, unless your mum and dad in Eritrea are willing to pay for it, which, of course, we have that on record as well, don't we? But I do take your point. I mean, I suspect, because they're in a really interesting situation over there, because you don't want to have a load of cash in places like the Calais jungle, because people will just rob it. So what you are seeing now is pitched battles between men from Sudan and men from the Middle East and Arabic countries, where the men from the Middle East and Arabic countries who seem to have a bit more money will organise the boat crossings and pay for it, and then they'll be about to get on the boat. And then from within the sand dunes come a lot of the Sudanese men who then fight off the others. They get in that boat and then they get out there. I mean, this sounds like something out of a really bad kind of like comedy sketch or whatever, but it's just playing out on the beaches of Calais most days. So that's happening. And yeah, but I mean, in terms of getting in the backs of lorries across the continent, it's very, very hard to put a price on it, because you could conceivably do that for free if you're willing to try hard enough. You know, whether or not there's, you know, suppliers that are willing to do it. I mean, I would have thought that the big expense is getting across the channel, less so.
So you've got to Calais.
Yeah.
You've fought off the Sudanese gang to get in the boat that you paid for. You've crossed the channel.
Yeah.
You've come to the UK. What happens when you set foot in
the
UK?
Well, you know, you've had to cross the channel, by the way. You've got a few, you know, several hundred metres out of it, and then, of course, Border Force arrives.
Okay, and what do they do?
Border Force. So British Border Force, having been radioed by the French to tell them exactly where the boatload of illegal migrants is, will then come and get the migrants. And then they'll put them on the Border Force vessels, and they might keep them on there whilst they do a little merry-go-round of British misery where they go and pick up all the other ones as well. And then they'll bring them on the boat, and then that boat will come into Dover, and then you're there. And then you're taken to a processing centre where, by definition, I think very little can happen. Because if you are claiming to not have any documents with you, or any records of who you are, or you are willing to lie about where you're from and your age, there's a limited amount of stuff that they can actually do, isn't there? So they'll do a medical check on you, they might take certain things like fingerprints. We are not allowed in Britain to do dental checks for age verification or wrist x-rays for age verification, because that would be against their human rights.
Quite right.
So we are not allowed to do that.
You're not allowed to find out how old they are.
You're not allowed to medically find out how old they are.
Why is that against their human rights?
Just is. It's traumatic. It would be traumatic for them to undergo some kind of dental examination. Bear in mind that, by the way, a lot of the migrant hotels, and even I think on the Baby Stockholm, they were allowed dental treatment.
Right.
So like that was fine, but you couldn't do it if you wanted to use that to test how old they are. So that was rubbish.
Does this make any sense to you, Patrick?
No, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. But again, what happens here is you start with a policy about like, let's do wrist x-rays or whatever you can do now with various different biometrics, whether it's eye scans or whatever it is, fine. And you want to do that. And then what you'll get is a load of hardline left-wing activist lawyers coupled with a lot of charity groups concocting a case as to why that shouldn't be allowed. And then you have to get through, from what I can gather, a procession of quite left-wing courtrooms in order to get that made illegal and stopped. And then they can make that illegal and stopped. And certainly the last time I checked, which was about a year or so ago, it was the biometric scans and the wrist x-rays and the dental thing was a no-no. I'll check it again. I don't think they've changed it, but I don't think they have changed it. And so we weren't allowed to do that. You were not allowed to, which is why you end up with ridiculous court cases, like a 6'8" Sudanese chap with a receding hairline and a grey beard who is like 15. Right. That's
taking
why,
his GCSEs.
because why would those court cases exist if you could just check that?
Right.
So that implies to me.
Okay, so I've arrived. I've been processed. They've not made sure I'm not 53.
Yeah.
Now what?
Oh, well, then they'll divvy you out around the country. So you will end up in a migrant hotel somewhere. Or if you are, I suppose, a bit unlucky, you might end up in a place like RAF Wethersfield or a couple of those sites that we have around the country as well. They're all full now. So I'm presuming you just go into a migrant hotel and you will be allowed to stay there. You'll have everything paid for. So food, no bills, clearly. And what then happens is that you're not allowed to be tagged with human rights again. So we can't put tags on them so that we know where they are. So like you go to a hotel and then you could just abscond, especially if you happen to, like we did, find a guy who's willing to give you a job. And which apparently is very easy to do. So you can do one or two things. You can either just work as a delivery driver just from the hotel anyway, and no one in the hotel seems to give a toss about that. Or you could just leave the hotel and just work somewhere else and stay with someone else and just disappear like vapor into Britain.
What if you don't disappear? What if you stay? What happens?
So then if you stay and you go through the process of trying to claim asylum, then you have an infinite number of attempts to do that, and only one of them has to be successful. So you can claim, be rejected, claim, be rejected, claim, be rejected. One of the more famous cases about that was a chap called Abdul Azidi, who was the Clapham acid attacker, doused a woman and a child in acid, and then actually, as it happened, threw himself, I think, off Lambeth Bridge or something, wasn't it? But anyway, so he had tried and failed for asylum 3 times. The 4th attempt, I think it was, or maybe 3rd, 4th attempt, either way, he then suddenly discovered that he was actually a Christian man and that we could not send him back to his Muslim country. And there was a particular denomination of the Christian church that actually, to be fair, in this particular one was not the Church of England. It was some kind of Baptist denomination. But anyway, they were willing to vouch for it. He'd been done for a sex offence in the meantime, naturally. And,
2 years without sin, Patrick.
Well, which was very much their approach, actually, as it turned out. Yeah, you're right. So he'd done for a sex offence, Baptist church, waved him through, vouched for him, and then the Human Rights Brigade decided that, yeah, of course, how could we send this good, God-fearing Christian man back to a Muslim country? We couldn't do that. So then he doused a woman and child with acid, threw himself off a bridge, and then had a Muslim funeral.
Well, that sounds like the system working as intended, mate.
In 2025, more than half of all companies are using AI. Microsoft, Amazon, and Google have laid off thousands of workers because of it. No wonder 40% of people are worried AI could take their job this year. But here's what often gets missed. These companies aren't just cutting jobs, they're also hiring. They want people who understand AI, who know how to use it, and who can build with it. If you run a business, freelance, or want to future-proof your career, AI is no longer optional. It's a tool that gives you an edge. That's why we're recommending this live 2-day AI training from Outskill. It's 16 hours of hands-on learning, normally priced at $895. But we've partnered with them to offer the first 1,000 of you completely free access. Click the link in the description to save your seat now. You'll learn the key skills for working with AI, including prompt engineering, data analysis, building AI agents, using AI in Excel, and automating your workflow, all without writing any code. Over 4 million people across 40 countries have already joined this training. Sales professionals, marketers, HR teams, freelancers, business owners. This is for anyone who wants to stay ahead. Our team is doing it too. Spots are filling fast, and the introduction call and first session for the 2-day training happens this Friday at 10 a.m. EST. So sign up as soon as possible. Click the link in the description to save your seat now.
Why is it really true? Is this some right-wing GB News hysteria when you say you have an infinite number of attempts?
Well, as far as I'm aware, I mean, so there's a case with a lady from Nigeria,
Right,
who tried 8 times, and then at the 8th attempt, she was very clever, or her lawyer was very clever about this, said that she was a member of a prescribed terrorist group, but it's only prescribed in Nigeria, but not by Britain. So if we sent her back to Nigeria, then she'd be persecuted for being a terrorist. But obviously she's allowed to stay in Britain because we don't think they are terrorists. So this was the 8th attempt. So, I mean, I don't see how you could say we've got a limit on it. And there was no evidence of her ever being involved with this group, by the way. This was the other thing. They just said she was. Like, she'd done something, like maybe she sent an email to them or something, and that was it. There wasn't any evidence of her actually like going, like being a part of this group.
So when your application is rejected, you just go back to your hotel and then you just make it an appeal or another application?
You may well end up be scheduled for deportation at some point. I mean, again, the way our human rights laws work at the moment is, let's say you were from Afghanistan and we wanted to deport you. I don't really see any way that we currently, under our current laws, could do that, because we just don't return people to Afghanistan. So we would have to send them to a third country if we were even doing this, which may have been a Rwanda, or it may have now be, what was the latest one there was talk of? Was it Bosnia or something like that? I think it wasn't something like that, wasn't it? So you would probably have to do that. The French aren't going to take them back, I would have thought, or they're not, are they? So again, it's like, you can...
What does that mean? What does that mean? This is a bit I don't understand. What does that mean the French won't take them back? Like, if we send them on the boat back to Calais...
I've thought about this. Why not just try that?
Yeah. So why can't we do that? Well, it's against their human rights, I imagine.
Well, look, everything's against their human rights, so we need to just accept that about everything. But yeah, I mean, would it work the other way? I mean, again, you wouldn't be able to do that, would you, though? Because they'd say, well, you've just put these people on a boat and you've pushed them into French waters, and it would only take one death, wouldn't it, for whoever's made that decision to ultimately be a murderer, and then and then have to resign from their job. So yeah, so there's a vanishingly small probability of anyone who even being deported, even if they are scheduled for deportation. So this is why you end up with cases where people have been done for child rape and then sent to prison in Britain, and they're given like a 10-year prison sentence, and then there is still a discussion to be had about, once they've completed that prison sentence, whether or not they can be deported. I mean, the most recent one, this is not a Channel migrant story, this is just a migrant story about Abdul Kwari Rauf, who was one of the ringleaders of the Rochdale grooming gang, was set for deportation 12 years ago, shredded his Pakistani passport, so he would then be technically made stateless if we sent him back to Pakistan. It's emerged yesterday that he is working still as a delivery driver in Rochdale, so if you were a victim of his or a survivor of his and you ordered a pizza, he might turn up to deliver it for you. With the money that he's earned from that, he's built a house in Pakistan. So this guy that shredded his Pakistani passport and renounced his Pakistani citizenship, and therefore we can't deport him to Pakistan, has, with money that he's been allowed to earn, he was also on legal aid, by the way, for his fighting all of his legal costs, with the money that he's been allowed to earn, he has built a property for him and his family in Pakistan. But we can't deport him.
I mean...
So...
look, at least there's a happy ending, mate. But, we joke about it, but let's be honest, Patrick, and I'm going to... This is fucking pathetic.
Yeah, I'm glad someone's pressed the F-bomb. I am, because it is. It pisses me off. It pisses me off. It brings me to the verge of tears a lot of the time looking at it and thinking, what are our priorities? Seriously, what are we? Are we a joke country? I mean, look around where we are today. Brilliant part of the world. I had to fight my way through crowds of tourists here because people want to come here. They want to be a part of Britain. They want to they love our flag. They want to see it. They want to be a part of this nation, right? And yet, for us Brits, it's becoming very, very, very difficult to see a future here because our political leaders are turning us into a plot of land for the world to use willy-nilly and take advantage of at our expense. And then on top of that, make it very difficult for us to go about living our lives when it comes to accessing public services, feeling safe on the streets. It's not on. It's not on.
And it's also as well, because we've talked, the one aspect that we haven't talked about is the financial aspect. How much is this costing us? No. We're talking, look, you know, the NHS is on its knees. You know, the infrastructure's crumbling. People are struggling to get school places, blah, 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 blah. How much are we spending on this?
Yeah, well, an astronomical amount of money. I mean, it varies depending on what you read on any given day, but between something like 8 billion quid a year on the migrant hotels or 6 billion quid a year. But then on top of that, and this is the figure that, again, is very difficult to get hold of, but I think is the more enraging figure, which is the social housing cost. So once people have been told that they can stay in Britain, and again, as we've discussed, I think a lot of those decisions are made simply because it was like, what's the point in trying to deport this person? We can't. So you're told you can stay in Britain. Then they are no longer allowed in many cases to stay in the migrant hotels. They're given something like 28 days to get out of here, which puts them very often, despite what local councils will say, it puts them very, very close to the top of their social housing waiting list because there is an immediate risk of homelessness. If you or I were broke, flat broke, and were going through a divorce and whatever else, right?
Don't know why you pointed at me. How did you know?
Well, I hope you're not, by the way. Sorry,
no,
but,
I'm not. I'm not.
But we're going through a divorce, and there's probably someone's house you could stay in Britain, probably. Whether it's a friend or like your mum or whatever, you know, I don't know. But for these people, they will say, well, there's no one's house I can stay in. So they go very close to the top of the housing waiting list, and social housing or private rental accommodation that's then bought up by the Home Office or by the local council is used for them. Well, that all costs a huge amount of money. A huge amount of money. They are clearly then not going to walk into a £100,000 a year job. Many of them, I dare say, will never really try to work. A lot of them don't seem to be working. I mean, there's a lot of people who come illegally that don't seem to feel the need to work at the moment. So then they're getting everything for free there. So it's NHS bills, isn't it? Plus translator costs as well. That's another thing. So you've got all that. School places. Again, there's no real qualms about how many kids you have in the way that maybe perhaps certain other people might have to consider how many children they have because we ultimately have to pay for that. Well, if you're not paying for anything anyway, then you can just crack on, can't you, and have 6 or 7 of them. So we're all paying for that as well, and everything. So by the time you've added all of those things up, and those figures are not all in one neat little place, unfortunately. So it's very difficult to go and get all of those numbers about what realistically is the actual cost of every single one of these people over the course of their entire lifetimes, if they spend that lifetime poncing and living off the state, which I suspect strongly that most of them will.
And then you add to that the resources of the legal process, the resources of staffing the hotels, the resources of staffing the border force, the whole thing. This is a joke, man.
You know, one of the things that I think is a real joke is that we appear to be importing low-skilled migrants to act as security guards for hotels full of illegal migrants. So when you see videos of people who go into these migrant hotels, like kind of quotes unquote citizen journalists or whatever you might call them, when you see all those videos, there's very little English spoken on the door by any of the security guards. They've all got the full, you know, the security guard armband on and the high-vis and all that, and the walkie-talkie. So there seems to be very little English spoken a lot of the time there. And that's a legal job. But what does that job pay, probably? I mean, I don't know, but I mean, being a security guard at a hotel, I would have thought maybe you're quivering on the edge of about 30 grand, maybe, if that. I would have just as a guest there. So those people clearly live here. So they've moved over here, whether it's specifically for that job or they've come here and then got it. So then that's their job. They get paid for it. They live here. They're probably allowed to bring certain relatives over anyway, which I imagine many of them do. Otherwise, why would they have come here? So you've got that. And we probably pay for some of their relatives as well. and then they are there, their actual job is to guard a hotel full of people who are here illegally. I mean, that is insane. That is insane.
And on that subject, one thing we haven't talked about is, I don't know, but I imagine a lot of these things are being managed through government contracts to big contractors, whose names I don't want to list off the top of my head because I don't know, but I imagine a few of them are a few of the regulars, let's say, right? The companies that get all the big government contracts. And I imagine they make quite a lot of money from this, and I imagine they're quite vested in this situation continuing.
Yeah. I mean, there is one guy, I won't name. I won't.
Feel free to name him if you want.
Well, the only reason I want to name him, his surname's King. I think his first name Gray, but the reason I know King is because of the Migrant Hotel King, and he's quite literally the Migrant Hotel King. He's Britain's first illegal migrant billionaire. He is a legal bloke, by the way. He's I think from like Essex or somewhere, but he owned a couple of like kind of caravan park things, and he's built his way up, and now he gets a lot of the contracts for food and accommodation for all of these migrant hotels. And part of me, by the way, thinks absolutely fair play to the guy because, you know, it's a business. He's obviously got a very shrewd business mind. He is now like one of the richest people in Britain. He made the Times Rich list this year. You know, okay. I mean, there's an argument to be said about whether or not he's fundamentally betraying his country, of course, but...
Look, mate, there's one billionaire who's not leaving, so...
Yeah, he's not going anywhere.
He's sticking around to do his bit for Britain, isn't he?
100%. But he's an individual. He's got a company, of course, but he's an individual. But so some of the bigger companies, like Serco, for example, they get big deals when it comes to all sorts, especially with social housing. Now, they will be absolutely coining it in. And so my big fear with the social housing aspect of it is how can you make sure that other people in the area are safe? And we had a case where there was a man in Hartlepool who was walking his dog, an elderly man, early in the morning and was stabbed to death by an asylum seeker who had been through 13 other countries before getting to Britain, and he killed him because he wanted revenge for what was going on in Gaza. And we found out about that story. I think probably every news outlet found out about that story within like maybe a day of it happening. And the government at the time, wasn't this government, the government put a D notice on it to stop you reporting on it. So for national security reasons, they stop you reporting on it.
How is that a breach of national security by you reporting on it?
Well, you might have riots. Is that right?
That will be, so they don't have to justify what their national security is, otherwise we...
But that would be the rationale,
that would be
right?
the rationale, that you might end up with riots because of the truth.
Right.
And so you stop from reporting that, then of course it goes to court and then it's out there. But by which time you may be looking at 6 months or a year on from the event and whatever. So he wasn't in a migrant hotel, he was in a house of multiple occupancy at the time. Which is the kind of house, I don't know what company was running this, so I don't want to defame anyone or whatever, or libel anyone, but he was in a house of multiple occupancy. So at some point, someone's put him up there, haven't they? Whatever company it is that's bought this. Well, they clearly they can't have a security guard outside every single one of these HMOs. So if you're living in an area anywhere in the country now, and the government or one of these agencies or whatever it is buys a terraced house on your street, slaps another 3 or 4 bedrooms in it, turns it into basically a glorified mini migrant hotel with absolutely no security whatsoever, and there's like a lunatic in there with a kitchen knife, which is all they need, and they go out, like, what is stopping them from doing this? And I mean, I've been to Serco to ask what some of their procedures are, and they gave me a very, very, very wishy-washy thing back, which actually, the tone of it for me was more about trying to make sure that the migrants themselves were safe, as opposed to the people around them. You know, the British public are being asked to put up with a hell of a lot here. We are being asked to take on a huge personal safety risk. And, you know, people might watch this and go, oh, he's making out that every single person who crosses the channel is a dangerous lunatic. Well, I'm not saying that, but like one's enough. And, you know, the fact is that the rate that we're going at the moment, and we've got a record year on top of a number of record years, well, it only takes a few of them, and you have got a serious problem on your hands. And again, it comes down to that, oh, if you want to try and cover the odd thing up by saying, oh, it would cause riots, well, like, that's not dealing with the actual problem, is it? trying to silence it or something. Because at some point, I hate to say this, but at some point, something is going to happen.
As keeps happening.
Yeah,
You mentioned
yeah.
Abdul Yazidi and others.
Yeah.
It's happening all the time.
Yeah, and you can see it, can't you, happening like in a big way. Like, I don't want to give anyone ideas for anything, but go to a really public space and do something, kill a lot of people. Well, I'm not condoning riots or setting fires or anything, but again, how do you think people are going to react to that?
Well, this is why I was going to challenge something you said, which is when you said the British people are being asked to put up with... I don't think anyone's been asked. I don't remember being asked about this. I don't remember any political party. And look, we've talked about Blair, not Blair, Starmer,
That's all right.
Starmer and Reeves.
Yeah.
But this was just as bad under the Conservatives, right? So, but
as
I don't
just.
remember in any of those manifestos anybody saying we're going to let tens of thousands of illegal immigrants in every year on small boats and lorries from Calais. I don't remember being asked about that.
No.
Because I imagine if we had been asked about that, I think we'd all be against it.
Yeah. Yeah, we would, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
We absolutely would. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, which is the level of betrayal and gaslighting, which is exactly what this is.
Right.
On top of numerous different other levels of betrayal and gaslighting, has now, I think, brought the British public to the brink. And I think by nature, we are a relatively placid bunch. I mean, when you see there seems to be riots in Paris every single week, actual very aggressive strike action all the time. I mean, there's clips that you see in Germany and maybe parts of Holland as well, where people are, pretty pumped up about some of the things that are going on over there. Okay. The Spanish as well are really kind of getting on board with it now. The Italians, grief. I mean, you could go on, right? Whereas here in Britain, I think by nature we are a bit more placid. But I think it's kind of ending now, isn't it? That I think people, there's a sense that we're being pushed to the brink. And if you feel as though nothing that you say or do is being listened to by the people who are in power, and then the people behind that layer of power as well, so whether it's immigration judges or whatever, it's that sense of betrayal, but also helplessness and desperation that can make people feel incredibly angry and can lead to a volatile powder keg situation. And that, I think, is where we are.
And what's your assessment? Because Starmer, obviously, he came in, he scrapped the Rwanda scheme that never really got going under the Tories anyway. And his idea was that the way you deal with this problem the illegal immigrants are not the problem. The problem is the gangs.
Yep.
And what you do is you smash the gangs. How are we doing on smashing the gangs?
Well, we're not smashing any gangs, so that's good. And actually, Claire Fox, who I believe you chaps know well, gave a really interesting intervention in the House of Lords yesterday, where she called for it to be part of legislation for the government to tell us how many gangs they've smashed. Because that was the cornerstone, as you rightly point out, of their anti-illegal immigration policy. It wasn't deportations. It wasn't a third location like a Rwanda. It was smash the gangs. That was the cornerstone of their illegal migration policy. Now, I don't think they've really smashed any. They might have smashed one or two, but then they just pop up. And as evidenced by the work that we've been doing at GB News and we're going to continue to do, it is unbelievably easy to find a human trafficker, get into contact with them, get a location, get across the channel, get a job on the other side. There's no smashing taking place. So that's not happening. But again, with Keir Starmer, I question whether or not that was all just a lie. So the whole thing. I mean, you have to look at the political political views that this man has had over the years, and I am including in that his work as a human rights lawyer. I do not buy the cab rank rule. So this is what him and Lord Hermer regularly dine out on, and their defenders will say the only reason they continually took cases from people who say helped to mastermind the 9/11 terrorist attacks, or Shamima Begum, or some of the nastiest, most horrific people that you can ever see, or Hizb ut-Tahrir when they were being prescribed as a terrorist organisation in Germany. The only reason why they kept taking these cases was because of the straightforward matter of coincidence those cases kept crossing their desk, and they had to do it.
Cab rank rule being whoever is up takes the case.
Takes the case.
Right.
Absolutely. And I don't buy that.
Because?
Because I think if you're any good as being a lawyer, then you will be able to get off something. So you can say, oh, sorry, I'm not in this week. There's also a reason. There's also surely got to be a reason why all of these nasty, horrible people somehow know how to get in touch with you. Why? Of any law firm in the world, of any barristers' chambers in the world, of anyone at all, why do they keep contacting you? And if you were really distressed, day in, day out, gosh, I've got another terrorist here. oh gosh, I've got another foreign child rapist here. Well, you'd get out of it, wouldn't you? You'd go, right, look, I've had enough of this now. I want to go into a different branch of the law or something, or you go to a different chambers or whatever else. I'm not saying there's any kind of evil intent there. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that I think there's a pattern there of like zero deportation, borderline open borders, representing consistently people who are enemies of the state, and you know, an anti-authoritarian twang to that. That Keir Starmer upheld, both personally and professionally as well, for years, for decades, and that ultimately is a big part of why he ended up in Downing Street, because that was part of his career. That career led to him being DPP. That led to him being getting into politics. And I seriously question about whether or not he ever wanted to smash the gangs or stop the migrant crisis or reduce illegal immigration at all. I have questions over that.
Patrick, we've spoken for around an hour now about this whole tragic, terrible, awful situation. What do you think it actually says about us as a country?
Well, it says that we're a soft touch. I think the bigger point is that we don't value our country enough. So Britain is not just a plot of land where any Tom, Dick and Harry can come and live. This is a proud country with a proud history, with a proud people, and by the way, a brilliant people as well. We have done things as a nation that beg a belief when you think about the size of us over the years. I mean, whether or not it is things like going out into the world and, you know, kind of, I'm not trying to get into the rights and wrongs of the empire here. I'm just saying just what we managed to achieve as a nation that was remarkable given our size, etc. But also things like producing some of the greatest minds that the world has ever seen in culture, music, in the shape of Alan Turing, for example, cracking the Enigma code, all of this stuff. I mean, there is something very, very special on this island of ours here. There really is something very special about the British way of life and the British mind and something about it. And we have decided that none of that matters anymore. It doesn't matter. And that we are allowing various different people to come in, but not just come in, but also take the piss. So like whether it's make us less safe, whether it's ponce off the state, whether it's take up housing and whether it's take up, you know, various public services as well, that's a ridiculous thing. I mean, I regret that it sends out a message around the world now that Britain is there for the taking, that Britain is becoming a joke country. And I hate that. And I think we have to think that maybe that stems from an inherent aspect of self-loathing amongst a certain class of people in Britain. Whether or not that's people who feel inherently privileged by being here, can't quite cope with it, and therefore feel as though they need to make the whole place shit in order to try to come to terms with that about themselves. Possibly whether it's that people have drunk the Kool-Aid on the old, you know, kind of critical race theory stuff, on, you know, the bad things about the British Empire and all of that. I don't know, but to me, there is a very small but very powerful cohort of people in Britain that feel almost ashamed of it and embarrassed of it and are doing their best to try to ruin the country. But yeah, it says all of that about Britain and more. It just says that we're being taken for mugs. Our generosity is it's just being taken for an absolute ride, and it's depressing.
All right, bit of an unexpected one for you, but this actually got my attention. The other day, I was scrolling online and came across this video from none other than Chuck Norris. Yes, that Chuck Norris. He's in his 80s now, and according to him, he still feels like he's in his 50s. And honestly, watching it, I could believe it. The video goes through 3 specific foods he says you should avoid like the plague, and a few other things he's doing to keep in shape and stay sharp. I was skeptical at first, but the stuff he suggests is genuinely simple and actually makes a lot of sense. If you're interested in health, energy, or just curious what Chuck Norris swears by at 80+, this is worth your time. Watch the video now at chuckdefense.com/trigger. That's chuckdefense.com/trigger. And we put the link in the description below to make it easy.
And one of the other things about it, I think, that may be worth adding to your analysis is, I wonder, this is an interesting question. I don't know what the answer is genuinely. Is there, in your opinion, some strategy to the way that illegal immigrants are being distributed across the country.
Yes.
Because, like, I live in a nice leafy part of Kent, for example. I don't see any migrant hotels in my area, which happens to vote Lib Dem most of the time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Do you see what I mean? Because I'd imagine there'd be a lot of constituencies that currently vote in a particular way that would vote very differently if they were faced with the brunt, if they were the coalface of this issue.
Is it. So wasn't that experiment played out in real time in America with Martha's Vineyard?
Yeah.
Where, who was it that flew them all in?
I think it was Ron DeSantis.
Ron DeSantis, decided to clap back a bit, didn't he? And he said, all right, well, let's fly them all in.
Yeah.
And they didn't want them out, did they? So they turfed them out again. I agree with you, or I not necessarily agree with you because you didn't really say you agree with it, but I take...
I'm just wondering.
I am of the view that there is a deliberate thing here. I think that there was an initial attempt to just bury them in big cities. So, cover it, mask it, places like London and Birmingham. And
because no one really knows.
You don't know. You don't know, do you? And again, you could be a tourist, could be whatever. So I think there was that. And then obviously the problems then grown and they thought, okay, where do we put them? So then the north of England became a large dumping ground. And again, why was that? Places like Bury, Bradford, Blackburn, Bolton, Oldham, all those places had already had the most unbelievable demographic change in the last 30 or 40 years. I mean, the most unbelievable demographic change. I mean, there are parts there where it's basically Pakistan, and that they've just in one place in Bury, I think it is, have just elected a 19-year-old female medical student at the local council election. She stood on a ticket of essentially Sharia law, male and female segregation, and she was elected. There. So that's where we're at there. So if you then decide to lob a load of blokes in from the Middle East who have come here illegally, again, that might blend in a little bit. You might not see that so much. So there was big parts of the Northwest, especially there in the Midlands, were used. There was also they jumped on the SNP's idiocy with tremendous effect. So they wanted to become a sanctuary country. They wanted Glasgow to become a sanctuary city. So then they decided, well, if you say it now, then we'll lob a load of them your way. And then there was a urgent plea from the head of Glasgow Council to say, please stop sending us asylum seekers because we can't cope. There's social housing is full, hotels are full, there's tent cities here, we can't have that. There's also massive crime issues. So there was that. Wales did a very similar thing as well. Wales, again, Labour, wanted to be a nation of sanctuary, so they leapt on that a little bit and turned some of those houses in. But I think there's a lot of these very leafy areas which you were alluding to in the kind of southeast of England, and well-to-do areas that seem to be resolutely untouched by the migrant crisis. And I would do something that people might think is a bit extreme or whatever. I know if you vote if your constituency votes for an MP that is pro-open borders, pro the migrant crisis, anti-deportation, then you get them. So that's it. So you get them. And areas that vote to not have that, don't get any. And then we'll see what happens, won't we? I would do that. And I actually would almost say that's actually fair enough, because that's what those people have voted for. So why is it that they can vote for something and walk around, all peace and love? It's like the Glastonbury crowd, isn't it? That whatever he was called, Bob Villan or whatever, standing there. And then the camera pans round and that audience is a load of thick, white, middle-class lovies cheering their own demise. And you think, well, okay, why don't we maybe give them a little bit more of that then? Why don't we maybe in their areas, we give them a bit more of the migrant crisis, and we give them a bit more of the social accommodation or the private rental accommodation? When Tabitha and Tilly go to leave mummy and daddy's country cottage at some point and decide that they're going to pay rent somewhere, and then they are doing battle with the Home Office for rent prices, maybe they might start to think, oh, hang on a minute, there's something a bit wrong here. Why don't we do more of that? Rub people's face. We were told, I can't remember who, was it? I don't want to defame it. Was it Nash Shah or someone this or something like, so we should rub their noses in the faces of diversity? No,
that was a memo from a Labour advisor called Andrew Nether.
Right, good.
Not Nash Shah.
So sorry, Nash. No. Sorry, Nash. Anyway, so we need to rub...
It was the idea of mass immigration was to rub the right's nose in diversity.
There you go.
That was there.
Well, why don't we give them a bit more of that then? Rub their noses in the faces of the migrant crisis and the realities of what that is. maybe make them put up with some of the issues that people in other areas have had to put up with for far too long, whether it's in social housing or whether it's in migrant hotels, and just see, because I am convinced that, when people are actually exposed to the realities of it, then they don't really want that in their area or next door to them.
And have you had politicians on your show to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean...
And what do they say?
Well, Labour don't really want to come on and talk about it.
Yeah.
What a surprise.
Can't imagine why.
Well, I can't imagine why the Tories would want to talk about it either, because they're the ones that did this first.
I agree. I mean, certainly in the case of Robert Jenrick, for example, what he says is he resigned over it.
There were one or two people within the Conservative Party who tried.
Yeah.
But they did, as a party, fail, let's be honest.
100%.
Right.
I am of the view that ultimately this is all really the Tories' fault. Because they opened the floodgate. Oh, Tony Blair did a lot, right, fine. But then they did have a prolonged period of time.
Blair was deporting way more illegal immigrants than the Tories.
Yeah.
Way more.
Yeah, and did so on a fairly rational basis, like, you're a paedophile, off you go. Like things that you and I might be like, oh, did you stab a man at a bus stop? Okay, back to Morocco. Whereas now it's like, wow, should we put an arm around this chap and see if he can be rehabilitated? So, but the Tories are, for me, ultimately to blame for this, whether it's to do with the record levels of legal immigration that have got their own consequences, but also the illegal side of it, and allowing themselves and allowing Britain to basically be cuckolded by this human rights brigade that has now filtered its way right to the very top of the British legal system to all of this. They have got a huge amount to answer for. And that actually ties into something that I think is quite important, which is something that really just pissed me off, which has been a lot of white middle class complacency over the years. So a lot of people, I think maybe of my parents' generation and slightly above, decided not to bother running for like parish council anymore, or town council, or county council, and I don't really want to be an MP there or whatever. And then they were too scared to speak out when they saw things happening like demographic change that they didn't particularly like, or they're speaking out about safety and all of that. And they just kind of let it happen because they thought, it's not too bad now, it's okay now. And now here we are, and I think that we are at an existential moment in British history where we probably have one more chance, I think, to save the country. And I do have a bit of resentment, as much as I like my parents' generation generally. I do wish they'd have maybe seen this coming a bit and prevented it. And I certainly have a lot of resentment towards the ruling elites that were in charge for the last 14, 15, 16 years, because ultimately they have allowed us to sleepwalk into a situation now that I believe, as I've said, is utterly existential for the future of Britain.
I mean, what it actually shows is this: the political class is simply not fit for purpose, which is shocking, because when you've got 16 years, what we've actually seen is the country being destroyed. If a country doesn't have borders, then it's not a country.
Or identity, though, or a shared identity and a shared kind of like purpose and ideals. For as long as I can really remember, when I was going through school, I mean, my school wasn't too bad with this stuff, but I can remember seeing it around me whilst I was growing up, that there was the start of that sneer, or what even is British culture?
Yeah.
What even is it? Is it going to the Costa del Sol, having a roast dinner on a Sunday and all that? And I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. Well, maybe some Brits don't travel particularly well, but let's just have it right, all right? There is a huge amount of British culture. And in fact, there's so much British culture that it's been the envy of the world for a very long time, and that we should be very, very proud of it. And we shouldn't be seen as, as racist or Little Englanders or whatever for wanting to preserve and protect British culture, and for also being more forceful about integration. So we should never have allowed enclaves, which we now have. In fact, some of those enclaves are now almost cities. Like when I was in Birmingham looking at the bin strike crisis, like I saw every single flag of any single country in the Middle East, and of course didn't see any British flags anywhere. So that's one thing. People will go, well, there's only flags, all right, but it sets a tone, doesn't it? And then you're out there, you're walking down entire streets where, like, not only is there no English people, but there's no English being spoken. I mean, I tried to vox pop people on the streets, and there were people there that just like literally couldn't speak English for a start. I mean, you've got, it just doesn't, how have we allowed this situation to happen? And that's being replicated up and down the country. And for a lot of these people, like your Emily Maitlis's of this world and your Lewis Goodalls of this world and all of that, like, they don't want to go to those places.
No.
They don't.
No.
They certainly don't want
Well,
to.
they don't live in Bradford, so why would they care?
Yeah.
This is how they think.
Yeah, and what I'm convinced that they would do is if they decided to go and vox pop basically white people in those areas, they'd end up clipping them up, and it'd be like gammony white van man that you've stopped in the street, who, with the best will in the world to him, has probably not got a double first from Cambridge, and you've cut him up and made him sound like a bit of a knob, and then you've gone, oh yeah, look at that, that's the thick white reform voter that you've got there. Whereas actually, that bloke was born there. His dad was probably born there. He's turned around. He lives on a street now where no one speaks English, where there's massive levels of crime, where like there's the Pakistani flag is on one side of his house. You've got the Palestinian flag on the other. He's woken up one day and he's a bit like, oh, I don't really know what's going on here. And like, he's allowed to feel a bit squiffy about that. I think he's allowed to feel a bit squiffy about that.
Of course, and let's be honest about what it is. It's classism.
Yeah.
It's classism because
He's on his hobby horse
yeah,
now.
There we go. Here we go.
Working class is being oppressed, mate.
Right, we've got 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Tune in.
Oh my
Get
God, right,
yourself
yeah,
a brew.
You know what this problem is about? Me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about people like me.
Exactly. Now shut up, everybody, because I'm going to go and have a monologue. No,
Go on.
but genuinely, this is classism of the highest order, because what it is middle class people sneering at working class people's problems. And if they say, or they make a point, which is completely legitimate, as you said, they're not going to engage with the argument because they realise they know they can't, because they realise that they will lose the argument. So all they can do is hurl epithets, invoke their race, the fact that they're white working class, they speak with an accent, which means they're stupid and racist, and therefore you can smear them and then walk away knowing that your halo is intact.
Yes, and the consequences of that will be that gets clipped up and might even go around their local community a little bit. And then Gary at number 42 is a frothing racist and no one should engage with him. And maybe his employer will sack him as well for it. There are consequences to the actions that some of these people do. Right, seriously, there was a lady who came on my show once, who was a member of an audience, right? So she was a member of the public. He came on and made a point not dissimilar to what we're just talking about here, how in her, it's literally just her lived experience of where she, like, oh, poor, this girl is just talking about, well, I live here, this is how the area has changed, this is stuff that's happened to me and is literally happening right now. And she made the point, I didn't think there was anything controversial about it whatsoever. And then some like lefties with big numbers of followers on Twitter get hold of it, clip it up, and bless her, she's emailing me the next day being like, is there any chance we can take this down from social media? Because like I'm getting like parents coming up to me at the school gates calling me like Hitler and for having these views. And this is the consequences of what these people do when they clip people up, when they try and mug them off and they try and demonize them. And I don't know about how you guys feel, but I am now. There are still things that get to me the odd time, depending on what side of the bed I've woken up to. But I'm basically immune to being called a racist now. I'm basically immune to being called an Islamophobe. Basically, because I know I'm not, and I want to be able to make the points that we make here and have these discussions here. And also, we're surrounded by it now, aren't we? In the media, we talk about this stuff a lot. So that stuff brushes off me. But if you are just like a normal guy called Paul who works in a garden centre, and like 50 people online start calling you an Islamophobe, and 5 pillars get hold of it, and then they stop calling you an Islamophobe as well. It's quite heavy shit for Paul, that. And that does tend to silence people and shut them up. And that's why they've got away with it for so long in this country, by allowing us to get into this position, because there's basically been a culture of fear and cancellation for people who wanted to just speak out. And it's created silence.
Before Patrick answers the final question, at the end of the interview, make sure to head over to our Substack. The link is in the description where you'll be able to see this.
Does Patrick think Ofcom is fit for purpose? A bit of a leading question. And if not, what would he change in terms of their remit and powers?
Do you think the government, the media, and even parts of the police are too scared to talk honestly about the strain illegal migration is putting on the UK? And more so, who's really benefiting from keeping the public in the dark with all the cover-ups?
What are the best arguments you've heard defending illegal and economic migration to the UK?
Defending illegal
migration
to the UK.
Yeah. Does anyone even defend it? Well, Patrick, look, it's good to have you on the show. And I think it's really important that you're doing the investigative journalism that you're doing. And I say, a lot of people like to slag GB News for being right-wing this. And, for us, we try to have people on from across the spectrum. But ultimately, there are some issues whether you're left, center, right, that just shouldn't be happening. There shouldn't be grooming gangs and rape gangs in our country. We should have a border. These aren't right or left-wing positions. They're the positions of everybody in the country who's got a brain, basically. So I think actually, whatever criticism people might have about GB News or whatever, I think it's really important that they're given an opportunity to people like you to come up with this stuff, to talk about things, just looking at the reality of what it is and giving a voice to a lot of people.
Yeah,
I think it's really important.
Can I just say one thing quickly? Because thank you for the opportunity today, because I've been a massive fan of you guys for such a long time, and it's just tremendous to be here. But what I would say on that is, the times that people come up to me in the street, like 99.9% of the time, it's like, oh, great, I watch GB News. And that, by the way, is from right across the racial spectrum. So there's a big Iranian community near me, there's a big Jewish community.
He's not racist.
No, but seriously,
I know, I'm kidding.
It is, no, but the odd time that people come up and they say the kind of things that you said, you're a bigot, or the latest one is you're a genocide supporter, which is, last time I checked, I wasn't particularly pro-genocide. I always say to them, okay, well, sorry, do you ever watch it? And they go, no. They don't actually watch it. So if you are out there and you are a bit on the fence about it, or you're only going off what you've heard other people maybe slagging GB News off, just watch it. Because we do cover a huge amount of stuff. We've spoken about the illegal immigration side of it, the grooming gang thing has been on previous episodes. Fine, yeah, there is that. There is all that. But there's also loads of other stuff out there as well that we discuss, whether it's with pensioners, whether it's with the farmers, whether it's with anything to do with welfare, whether it's all sorts of things. Like, it's not all tub-thumpy, illegal immigration stuff. So please.
But these issues do need to be covered. This is my point, right? And it shouldn't be considered a right-wing thing to think a country needs a border, because I'm old enough to remember when no one questioned that statement, whatever side of the political spectrum they were on. And actually, that mentality is what the country needs to get back to. And whatever the laws are that need to change, and whatever the political consensus is, that they just need to change back to sanity. Otherwise, you really are stoking a backlash that will be right-wing in the way that you really don't want to happen.
Yeah.
So it's good that you're doing the work you're doing, Patrick. Thanks for coming on. We're going to go to Substack and ask you questions from our supporters. But before we do, last question was the same. What's the one thing we're not talking about?
Okay. Well, in light of what you just said, right, this might sound a bit controversial, but I would like to see a little bit more investigation about what goes on in some mosques. Because I would like to know a bit more about where some of the imams are appointed from. For example, there's the Islamic Centre for England, who I am at pains to say now deny any wrongdoing or all any wrongdoing, and I know, of course, there is no record of them doing any wrongdoing, but their leader of that mosque is appointed by the Ayatollah of Iran. Okay, so that's a thing that maybe more people should know about. And where else is there in the country where there might be some characters like that who are freely able to give sermons to large congregations and gatherings of people? I think there should be a little bit more of a look into, or the ability at least to have a discussion about what kind of literature is on offer in some of the mosques in Britain. Who are some of these community leaders? Who are they? How have they become community leaders? And what is being said in the sermons and in the things that have been there? Because when October the 7th happened, there was a bit of a report that was done into this, actually by the Daily Mail, where they did attend certain things or receive leaked footage from certain ones in various different parts of the country. And there was some really, really, really fruity stuff being said in those things. And, I think that's an issue. And I counter that by saying, or add to it by saying, I would be saying exactly the same if I thought that was happening in churches. I think it should be exactly the same if it was happening in synagogues or wherever else. And so I just think that that's something that maybe people should feel a bit more comfortable to have a discussion about.
There you go. Head on over to Substack, where Patrick's going to answer your questions. What are the best arguments you've heard defending illegal and economic migration to the UK?
Defending illegal
Yeah.
migration to the UK.
Yeah. Does anyone even defend it?